This week on the ASC Podcast with John Goehle, we get you prepared for ASCA 2018, coming this week in Boston, Massachusetts. We talk about the latest news and information, and we focused this week on satisfaction surveys, patient complaints, and grievances.
Welcome to the ASC Podcast with John Goehle, a weekly podcast for anyone interested in the freestanding ambulatory surgery industry. This week's episode is sponsored by Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies, one of the nation's leading full-service ASC regulatory compliance consulting firms, and the Regulatory Compliance series of books for ASCs by John Goehle and published by Eden Group Development. Welcome to episode 15 of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle for April 9th, 2018, recording from our studio here in Rochester, New York. This is Sue Cronkite, Senior Nurse Consultant with Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies. I'm here with Jenna Alvarez, also a Senior Nurse Consultant with AHS, and John Goehle, the owner of Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies and one of the nation's leading ASC industry experts in regulatory compliance, finance, and administration. John is also a deemed status surveyor with one of the major accrediting organizations and the author of over 10 books about the ASC industry. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
So, John, we didn't see much of you this week, and I know you weren't lounging on a beach somewhere. Tell us about your week.
Certainly not. I'd much rather probably be lounging on a beach, but we really did have a great week this week. One of our centers in New York had a really fantastic accreditation survey. We're so proud of the staff out there. They really did a great job of preparing, but more importantly, they're always prepared, and it certainly showed. I think just another example of how important it is to really keep yourself prepared for these surveys and be on top of things. I also met a brand new client who owns an existing surgery center outside Dallas, Texas, and I'm very excited about working with the owner and their incredible staff. Truly a high-quality organization. I look forward to working with them on a regular basis to oversee their QAPI program so we can document the great care that they're giving to their patients. And on Friday, Jenna and I visited a center under construction near beautiful Plattsburgh, New York. They had a great crew up there, and we hope that we can open that center in August. But I understand that there are some staff reassignments going on at that center.
Yeah, there's a little bit of competition about who gets to go up there this summer. And we decided maybe you can take the ones during the winter. First quarter and fourth quarter, maybe?
You mean like when the snowstorms hit that area? Thanks a lot. Beautiful place, though. And we had a great lunch there with the whole crew. Sue, unfortunately, you weren't there because you've been under the weather a little bit, but they're all set for you there. So I'm looking forward to it. We also did a much-needed upgrade to our sound equipment. I know you've all of our audience out there has been very patient with us. So now we have all new microphones and an even higher tech setup for recording, and hopefully you'll see some consistency in our voices here.
So, Jenna, what is new this week in ASC news?
Well, this is just a reminder that we have a major deadline coming up for all Medicare-certified ASCs. Any center wanting to avoid a payment penalty for their 2019 Medicare rates must complete a new form electronically via the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, or the CDC's National Healthcare Safety Network, NHSN website. To be eligible to report their influenza vaccination coverage, their Medicare Quality Indicator ASC-8. The organization's primary contact with NHSN must accept the new NHSN agreement by April 14th, 2018, or you will not be able to submit data on NHSN on influenza participation, and the NHSN website functionality will be disabled until the consent form is accepted by your contact. Also, the submission deadline for all 2017 ASC quality reporting, or ASCQR, program web-based measures is May 15th, 2018. These measures include ASC 8, the influenza vaccination coverage that we just discussed, ASC 9, which is endoscopy and polyp surveillance, for appropriate follow-up interval for normal colonoscopy in average risk patients, which is reported via QualityNet. ASC 10, which is endoscopy and polyp surveillance for colonoscopy interval for patients with a history of adenomatous polyps, and avoidance of inappropriate use, which is also reported via QualityNet. Of course, the other big news of the week is the nation's biggest ASC conference, ASCA 2018, which starts Wednesday, April 11th and goes through Saturday, April 14th. The conference is being held at the Heinz Convention Center in Boston, Massachusetts this year, and all of us here at the podcast will be there. So make sure you say hi to us if you see us. John, you have 3 presentations. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Sure. On Wednesday, the opening, or I should say the pre-conference, I'll be doing the financial section of the CASC review course. The CASC review course is designed to help people determine how well prepared they are to take the CASC certification exam and to give them guidance on areas that they might want to focus on as they study to take the exam. Then on Thursday, I'll be presenting how to prepare for a survey and submit a plan of correction. This will be a great presentation to help you make sure that you're always prepared. One of the goals here certainly of this podcast. And then on Friday, I'll be presenting Finance 201, decision-making strategies that improve your bottom line. This year's conference also will have a new infection control track for infection control preventionists in your organization and anyone that might want to become one. And this new track will also help the infection preventionists to prepare for the upcoming Certified Ambulatory Infection Preventionist Certification exam, the CAPE exam, which we've been talking about quite a bit. We are all very excited about the conference, which will also have a new advanced sessions track for those of you who are more experienced in the industry and want some higher level sessions.
So if you haven't signed up for ASCA 2018, on-site registration will be available. We also want to remind our listeners that the first quarter ASCA benchmarking data collection is now open. So if you wish to participate in this great benchmarking program, get all of your data together and go over to the ASC Association website and follow the links to upload your data.
Sounds good. So let's take a short break here and we'll come back for our second part where we will be discussing satisfaction surveys, complaints, and grievances. So this week we're going to focus on satisfaction surveys, complaints, and grievances. One of those areas that are very important during surveys and certainly important for our ongoing quality improvement program. So let's start by talking about the CMS conditions for coverage and what it says about this. So satisfaction surveys fall under 416.43b, the standard for QA/PI program data, and the standard reads like this. The program must incorporate quality indicators data, including patient care and other relevant data regarding services furnished in the ASC. The ASC must use the data collected to monitor the effectiveness and safety of its services and the quality of its care, and identify opportunities that could lead to improvements and changes in patient care. The most important part of that standard is monitoring the effectiveness and safety of its services and the quality of its care. The implication in the CMS standard here is that in order to get this information, we have to talk to our patients, talk to the people that actually received our services. So, Jenna, why don't you talk about what the accreditation standards are for these areas?
Sure. For AAHC, and I'll state this is from the non-deemed status handbook, which went through quite a few changes and is substantially different, actually, from the deemed status handbook this year.
Which is going to cause quite a bit of confusion, I think, until 2019 when both of these standard books get back together again.
Yeah, so just it is a little bit different, but basically says the same thing through the same books. It's just in different parts.
Right.
So this is Chapter 3C, which states patient satisfaction with services and facilities provided is periodically assessed, and the elements of compliance, which is a new thing that AAHC does in the 2018 handbook, where there's different points, and based on how many of the points you reach, you get a different level of compliance. Those parts are: 1, patient satisfaction surveys are conducted on an ongoing basis. 2, the results are analyzed on an ongoing basis. 3, the governing body reviews the survey results. And 4, corrective actions are taken as needed. I believe in the deemed status handbook, this is Chapter 3, Subchapter 2L in the deemed status handbook. So, and then another element of compliance is in Chapter 5, Subchapter 1b, which states ongoing data collection processes are in place to measure quality and to identify quality-related problems or concerns. Examples include, but are not limited to, patient satisfaction surveys, financial data, medical legal issues, and outcomes data. For Joint Commission, LD.03.02.01 states that the organization uses data and information to guide decisions and to understand variation in performance of processes supporting safety and quality. Many types of data are used to evaluate performance, including data on outcomes of care, performance on safety and quality initiatives, patient satisfaction, process variation, and staff perceptions. So, John, can you tell us some of the best methods for collecting patient satisfaction data?
Sure. So let's talk about the various methods that we use in most ambulatory surgery centers for collecting data. The easiest way to do this is to do it yourself. Create a form, give the form to most of your patients, collect the data when it comes back on these, or and you can either hand it to the patients at the time that the patient is being discharged and ask them to fill it out at that point, which is the easiest way to make sure that they actually send it back, or give them a self-addressed envelope and have them mail it back to you. It is really best to give the satisfaction surveys to everybody, but you can also select a sample if that works for you. Then you review the results, you accumulate the statistics, and then follow up. Very importantly, you need to follow up on any comments that might have been made and investigate any complaints that have been included with the satisfaction survey. Take this data, track and trend it by quarter or month, whatever's convenient for you. Maybe even do some graphs to show your results over a period of time. Follow up on any of the trends that you might see. For example, if you see that patients are indicating decreasing satisfaction with the staff answering their questions about the payment for the services, you might want to make sure that your staff is doing a good job of answering those questions and re-educate your staff on processes to make that easier for them to explain to their patients. It's very important that after you gather all this information, you report the information back to the Quality Assurance and Performance Improvement Committee, the QAPI committee, and to report it to the governing body. It's very important here. This is one of those elements that I find is often forgotten in while I'm doing a survey of a place, is that sometimes they forget to report that data specifically to the governing body, and that is an accreditation standard. There are companies out there that can do this for you. It's going to be costly, and I really only recommend it for larger organizations. But the nice thing about that type of information when you get it from an outside organization is not only do they compare yourself against yourself and give you good information about your results, but many of these organizations can compare you against others and actually build a level of benchmarking into this work. Again, though, my problem with these using outside companies is it removes you a bit from the process, and you might find that the follow-up is not quite as effective or quite as ongoing as it is when you're collecting the data yourself.
Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is grievances. So going back to our conditions for coverage, 416.50D states that the ASC must establish a grievance procedure for documenting the existence, submission, investigation, and disposition of a patient's written and verbal grievance to the ASC, and the following criteria must be met. The grievance process must specify timeframes for review of the grievance and the provisions of a response. The ASC, in responding to the grievance, must investigate all grievances made by a patient, the patient's representative, or the patient's surrogate regarding treatment or care that is or fails to be furnished. And lastly, the ASC must document how the grievance was addressed, as well as provide the patient's representative, or the patient's surrogate with written notice of its decision. The decision must contain the name of the ASC's contact person, the steps taken to investigate the grievance, the result of the grievance process, and the date the grievance process was completed. John, can you explain this from the interpretive guidelines?
Sure. So the interpretive guidelines in this area actually provide quite a bit of information. And it basically states that information obtained from patient satisfaction surveys conducted by the ASC usually is not considered a grievance. So that's a very important element here. Information that we receive in these surveys are anonymous, and therefore we can't actually follow up and actually do a formal grievance there. However, if an identified patient writes or attaches a written complaint on the survey and requests resolution, the complaint must be treated as a grievance. And if an identified patient writes or attaches a complaint to the survey but does not request resolution, the ASC should still treat this as a grievance if the ASC would normally treat such a complaint as a grievance. A patient grievance is a formal or informal written or verbal complaint that is made to the ASC by a patient or a patient's representative or surrogate regarding a patient's care. When such complaint is not resolved at the time that the complaint was made by the staff person present. Abuse, neglect, or ASC compliance issues. So this does provide us the opportunity to take care of something immediately. So if a patient comes up and says that they had an immediate problem and that was resolved at the time that the care was being rendered, that doesn't necessarily need to turn into a formal grievance that requires a follow-up, unless the patient does request that. Now, let's talk a little bit about the written response and what the condition for coverage says. In its written response to any grievance, the ASC is not required to include statements that could be used in a legal action against the ASC, but the ASC should provide adequate information to address the specific grievance and what the result of their finding was. A form letter with generic statements about the grievance process, steps, and results is not acceptable. So it is very important that you provide feedback to the patient as to what was done to resolve the issue.
So, John, how does the organization demonstrate that they're appropriately doing the grievance process when a survey happens?
That's a good question. And there are quite a number of problems often. But, well, first of all, let me point something out. When I'm a surveyor, I like to go to the grievance binder. And even if the facility tells me that they've never had a grievance, I like to see that they have a log in place. And I like to see what that form would be that they would use to investigate the grievance. So, at the very least, you should create a binder. Create a log for all the grievances. Make sure you have a form to investigate the grievances and maintain that in that binder there. That gives you the ability to keep everything in one place. And then review that log regularly as part of your quality assessment and performance improvement program. And of course, report that to the governing body as applicable.
Thank you.
So somewhat aligned with patient satisfaction and grievances is the OAS CAPS process. Sue, why don't you give us an update on what OAS CAPS are?
Okay. CMS implemented a new voluntary national reporting program for the Consumer Assessment of Healthcare Providers and Systems Outpatient and Ambulatory Surgery Survey, or OAS CAPS survey, in January 2016. Implementation of mandatory reporting for the program will be announced as part of the final payment rules issued each year in November. The requirement to participate in this was proposed in the July proposed payment rule in 2017, but was removed from the final rule. We will know in July 2018 whether it has been proposed again, and of course in November 2018, whether we have to implement it. If you're interested, there's a lot more information on their website, oascahps.org. John, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, this has been leading into ASCA 2018. Let me point out that there's going to be a lot of vendors out there really selling their services here. And I've heard quite a number of these vendors making some statements that are not quite true, indicating that OAS CAPS is required and you need to start doing this right away. We do not know at this point when a OAS CAPS is going to be implemented. We suspect we're going to hear about it again in July. And if we do, then we're going to have to move on it pretty quickly. But don't let these vendors lead you down this path until we're absolutely sure that we need to do this. And the reason I say this is that this survey process is quite onerous. Jenna, you worked in the hospital. You told me about the hospital-based version of CAPS here. And actually, tell the audience a little bit about some of your experiences and what you had to do in order to deal with some of the complications that came about as that.
Well, we had some pretty bad results at our hospital when we first came out. We were a major level 2 trauma center with not many other hospitals around, a lot of rural areas that brought patients from everywhere within a 4-hour radius of us. And we had a lot of problems when we first implemented it because the survey is very different from the surveys that were given in the past. And to get the top results, you have to be a top performer, which means you got a level of 1 to 10, and if you don't get that 9 and 10, you don't get credit for, performing well. So, a lot of it actually was learning how to start scripting, with your nurses and educating patients, which is not a bad thing to do, about expectations.
So I think what you're trying to say is that often the people that stick around to fill out the survey after all of those questions that they go through are often the most disgruntled, and you don't get credit for anything short of a 9 or a 10 or the highest categories.
For the top box performance.
Correct. So I know the ASC Association worked very hard to have this rule delayed, and it succeeded in 2017. We can only hope that it will either be delayed again or removed. However, I do think that this is quite unlikely. This is a particularly burdensome rule, so let's make no bones about this. There's a particularly burdensome rule for ambulatory surgery centers, and you have to engage a CMS certified firm to gather the data. So this isn't something you can do yourself. You have to work with another organization, and the price is going to be expensive for most of your organizations. The most recent version of the proposed questions in this questionnaire included 37 questions. And it is likely to be quite a burden to complete for most of our patients. And if the questions are posed to them on a phone call, few people are going to be happy to answer such a long survey, particularly if their visit was short and they didn't really have any issues. Surveys like this are most likely to be completed in their entirety by patients who are not happy, and those who were happy are likely to give up partway through due to the length of the survey. The questions in the proposed survey are very specific. And again, there's 37 of them. For example, in our surveys, we tend to ask questions such as, did you receive appropriate post-op instructions, or did you have any problems or complications after the surgery? But in the OAS CAPS, there are much more specific questions. Let me give you a couple examples. Question number 19. Before you left the facility, did your doctor or anyone from the facility give you information about what to do if you had bleeding as a result of your procedure? Question 18. At any time after leaving the facility, did you have nausea or vomiting as a result of either your procedure or the anesthesia? Other unusual questions included, in general, how would you rate your overall mental or emotional health? And number 29, what is the highest grade or level of school that you have completed? So all of those questions obviously make this a much more complicated process, and quite frankly, I'm not sure is going to provide us a lot of information for us to be able to make changes, or at least not give us the ability to gear our satisfaction survey to gather information that would be helpful. We will, of course, continue to monitor the progress of OAS CAPS, and if it becomes required, we're going to help you prepare for it here on the survey. Lastly, during the survey this week that I was involved in, one of the surveyors made a suggestion that I thought was great. And what he said is that if you're trying to gather information about something that you're a little bit concerned about in your organization, for example, are your nurses doing a great job of inserting IVs? He suggested maybe not necessarily changing your satisfaction survey, but adding that question to your post-op questionnaire, the post-op questions that you ask the patient on the telephone after the surgery. And by the way, you should be doing that if you're not doing that currently. And in that way, you can kind of do very quick surveys of your patients to gather specific information. You can use this for performance improvement projects or quality improvement studies, and be able to gather information relatively quickly from your patients about this, and change that information on a dime. I thought that was a great idea and a great way of gathering information that you normally would have to go through some great steps in order to do. So definitely think about that in the future.
So let's just summarize what you should be doing. Make sure you survey your patients on a regular basis for their satisfaction, accumulate the results, follow up on comments, and report the result to the QAPI committee and governing body. Have a solid grievance process in place, and investigate any patient grievances and follow up with the patient about the results, and be prepared for the possibility of OAS CAPS implementation later this year. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back in just a minute.
John, I understand you have a special offer for our listeners this week.
Yes, indeed we do. So as a special offer for all of our listeners on this podcast, we're offering a significant discount on my book, The Survey Guide for ASCs, a guide to the CMS conditions for coverage and interpretive guidelines for ambulatory surgery centers. This book, as hopefully everyone knows by now, is the leading book in the industry for preparing for a CMS survey. Has a lot of information about what the regulations are, the interpretive guidelines, and really has a nice index to be able to find find this information quickly. I find it's particularly helpful for those difficult questions we sometimes get from the physicians when they say, okay, show me the regulation. And they can pull this book out and go right to that section very quickly. So in order to take advantage of this deal, go to the ASCPodcast.com website, which is ASCPodcast.com, and follow the link for this week's episode. You will see a link to purchase the book.
And how long is this offer available?
You can purchase this book at this discount through April 30th.
Thanks, John. So please head over to our website, ASCPodcast.com, to take advantage of this great offer.
So let's talk about some upcoming events in the ambulatory surgery center industry. Every week we will inform you of upcoming events. If you would like your event to be included in the podcast, please send the event information to info@ascpodcast.com. We will have a calendar of events on our website at www.ascpodcast.com. It is still under construction, but we're getting there. So our first event coming right up is ASCA 2018. April 11th to the 14th in Boston, Massachusetts, at the Heinz Convention Center. The New York State Association of ASCs will be holding their convention at the Desmond in Albany, New York, May 17th and 18th. New Jersey Association of ASCs' 8th Annual Ambulatory Surgery Conference will be June 12th and June 13th at the Wilshire Grand Hotel. The California Ambulatory Surgery Association CASA Annual Conference is September 5th through 7th, 2018 in Huntington Beach. CASA Infection Prevention Seminar will be November 7th through the 8th, 2018 in Casa Mesa. The Ohio State Association meeting will be September 18th through the 20th at the Hilton Polaris in Columbus, Ohio. And John, there's a couple of certification exams coming up. Can you tell us about those?
Certainly. So the new infection prevention certification exam, which is known as CAPE or CAIP. The registration dates are between August 1st and the 31st. To be able to take the exam between October 1st and 31st at an online testing center. There's testing centers throughout the United States that applicants can go to in order to take this exam. So again, first exam will be in October. You must submit your application between August 1st and 31st. The CASC exam, which is the Certified Ambulatory Surgery Credential, the next online exam through the testing center will be July 1st to the 31st, and that application must be in between May 1st and 31st. And there's a second exam this year in October, between October 1st and 31st, and that electronic application must be done between August 1st and the 31st. So thank you. This will be a regular part of our episodes. If you want to have your event listed, please send us an email at info@ascpodcast.com. So again, we want to remind everyone that Jenna, Sue, and I will be at ASCA 2018, the conference in Boston this week. Starting on Wednesday, we'll be there right through Saturday, and we will actually be recording next week's podcast while we are on site. That'll be a bit of a challenge, everybody. I think we're also going to invite all the other members of Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies that will be with us. That'll be Lori, Alex, and Judy D'Ambrosio, who is a former host of this podcast. So we would love to hear from you, so feel free to stop us if you see us wandering aimlessly throughout the conference and talk to us. Tell us what you think about the podcast. Give us suggestions for future episodes and tell us all about your ASCA 2018 experience. Next week, we'll be discussing our favorite parts of the conference, and who knows, we might have a few interviews interspersed with our episode. So we'll see you in Boston, and for those of you that can't make it, tune it in next week for the highlights.
Well, that's it for this week's podcast. Please join us again next week for another episode of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle. Make sure you take advantage of the special deal for John's survey guide at a discounted rate by going to ascpodcast.com. Don't forget to tell your friends and colleagues about the podcast and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. This podcast is an educational and operational tool and is not intended to be a comprehensive resource for all the rules, regulations, and standards that an ambulatory surgery center must meet. The advice provided should not be considered as, nor does it constitute, legal advice or opinion. When reviewing specific situations involving legal and regulatory issues, attorneys and other professionals should be consulted. This has been a production of Eden Group Development, all rights reserved. We would like to thank this week's sponsors, Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies, one of the nation's leading regulatory compliance and financial oversight firms. For a free consultation, contact John Goehle today at 585-594-1167 or through email at info@ah-strategies.com. Our other sponsor today is Eden Group Development, which publishes ASC Regulatory Compliance Series, the ASC industry's leading books, including the Survey Guide for ASCs, a guide to the CMS conditions for coverage, and interpretive guidelines for ambulatory surgery centers, and Ambulatory Surgery Center Governance, a guide for ambulatory surgery center owners and governing body members. These must-have books are available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble or directly from the publisher at reg-books.com. That's reg-books.com. If you are interested in advertising or sponsoring the ASC Podcast with John Goehle, please email us at info@ascpodcast.com. We would love to hear your questions and comments. Please email us at comments@ascpodcast.com.